The words burned like acid. You've always been our burden to bear. My father's voice, casual yet cutting, silenced the entire Thanksgiving table. I was 28 years old, with an economics degree gathering dust while I worked a dead-end job. 5 Years later, my investment strategies would be featured in the Wall Street Journal, and my family would be begging for financial advice. This is the story of how I went from being called a family disappointment to managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio that even the experts couldn't ignore. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced pumpkin pie filled my parents' colonial-style home in suburban Connecticut. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my mother brush melted butter across golden brown dinner rolls, while my younger sister, Vanessa, arranged decorative gourds on the dining table. The scene looked like it belonged on a Thanksgiving greeting. Card, picture perfect and just as artificial. "There she is," my mother said, noticing me in the doorway. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Diane, you're just in time to help set the table." I nodded and moved toward the cabinet where the good china was kept, the plates only used for holidays and special occasions. My sister shot me a look I'd grown accustomed to over the years, a mixture of pity and mild annoyance. "How's the job? Hunt going?" Vanessa asked, her voice honeyed with fake concern. At 25, she was already an associate at a prestigious law firm, engaged to a surgeon, and had recently put a down payment on a condo in Boston's Back Bay. Next to her accomplishments, my life looked like a study in stagnation. "Still at Meridian Credit," I replied, avoiding her gaze as I carefully arranged silver forks beside bone china plates. "But I've been researching some investment opportunities." "Investment opportunities?" My father's voice boomed from behind me as he entered the dining room, a tumbler of bourbon in hand. "With what money, Diane? Last I checked, entry-level customer service representatives aren't exactly rolling in disposable income." The comment stung, but I'd grown a thick skin over the years. After graduating with honors in economics from a state university, the only education my parents were willing to help finance, I'd struggled to find work during the recession. While my classmates with family connections landed coveted positions at investment banks and consulting firms, I bounced between temp jobs until settling at Meridian Credit Union as a customer service representative. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it paid the bills while I developed my real passion, value investing. "I've been setting aside a portion of each paycheck," I explained, though I knew my father wasn't really interested. "The market has some undervalued assets right now, especially in emerging technologies." My father snorted. "Diane, leave investing to the professionals. The last thing you need is to lose what little money you have on some get-rich-quick scheme." "It's not a scheme," I said quietly. "I've been studying market patterns and company fundamentals. There are opportunities if you know where to look." "Your sister just made junior partner 3 years out of law school," my mother interjected, changing the subject as she always did when I tried to talk about my interests. "And she's looking at houses in Brookline now that the wedding's set. For June." The familiar weight of comparison settled on my shoulders as we moved to the dining table. My brother-in-law-to-be, Dr. James Porter, arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and stories about his latest surgical triumph. My older brother Marcus showed up 30 minutes late with his wife Rebecca and their twin boys, immediately dominating the conversation with tales of his recent promotion at the architectural firm where he'd worked since graduation from Yale. I sat quietly, picking at my food and offering polite smiles when appropriate. My family had perfected the art of talking around me, mentioning my name only when necessary and quickly redirecting the conversation to more successful topics. I'd stopped fighting it years ago, preserving my energy for what really mattered to me. "So, Diane," my Aunt Catherine asked during a lull in the conversation, "are you still at that little bank?" "Credit union," I corrected gently. Yes, I'm still there. Such a shame, she said, shaking her head. With your grades, we all thought you'd do so well. Maybe you should have gone to business school like your father suggested. My father cleared his throat. Diane never did listen to practical advice, always had her head in the clouds with these investment theories. I pushed mashed potatoes around my plate, saying nothing. The $12,000 I'd grown from my initial $3,000 investment over the past 2 years existed in a separate reality from this dining room, one where my opinions were validated by market returns rather than family approval. Have you thought about going back to school? Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor by offering the advice. Rebecca's cousin was in a similar situation, dead-end job, no prospects, but she got her MBA and now she's doing great. I'm actually quite happy with my current path, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. My investment portfolio has seen a 300% return since I started. The table fell silent for a moment before my father let out a dismissive laugh. 300% of nothing is still nothing, Diane. It's not nothing to me, I replied, heat rising to my cheeks. I've been applying the value investing principles I've studied, and they're working. Some of the small-cap tech stocks I bought last year have already doubled. Beginner's luck, my brother-in-law offered with a condescending smile. The market's been on an upswing. Everyone's making money right now. Not on the specific stocks I've chosen, I countered. I identified companies with strong fundamentals, but undervalued market positions. It's not luck, it's analysis. My sister rolled her eyes. Here we go again with the investment genius routine. Diane, if you were half as good at this as you claim, you wouldn't be answering phones at a credit union. That's unfair, I said quietly. My job provides stability while I build my portfolio. Not everyone starts with connections or family support. The implication hung in the air, causing my mother to press her lips together in disapproval and my father's face to darken. I rarely pushed back during these family gatherings, preferring to let their criticism wash over me like water off a duck's back. But something had shifted in me recently. Perhaps it was the growing confidence from seeing my investment strategies succeed. Or perhaps it was simply years of diminishment finally reaching a breaking point. Let's not get into all that again, my mother said tersely. Marcus, tell us more about the new house you're building. But my father wasn't ready to let it go. He set down his fork with deliberate precision and fixed me with the stare that had intimidated me since childhood. Diane, it's time for a reality check. You're 28 years old, living in a rented apartment, working a job a high school graduate could do, and deluding yourself with fantasies about being the next Warren Buffett. Your brother and sister have established careers, families in progress, homes they own. What do you have? A few lucky stock picks that will probably be worthless next year. The table fell silent. Even Vanessa looked uncomfortable with the directness of the attack. That's not fair, Dad, Marcus said half-heartedly, though the defense felt more like an obligation than genuine support. What's not fair, my father continued, his voice rising slightly, is that your mother and I have spent years worrying about Diane while you two have forged ahead. We're not getting any younger, and the last thing we need is to keep supporting a grown daughter who refuses to get her act together. I've never asked for your support, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not since graduation. And yet here you are, year after year, no better off than the last Thanksgiving. Do you think we enjoy watching you struggle? Do you think it's easy explaining to our friends why our oldest daughter is the only one not thriving? The word burden hadn't been spoken yet, but it hung in the air like a guillotine. Richard, my mother warned, placing a hand on his arm. Not at the table. But my father was on a roll, the filter of social propriety dissolved by bourbon and frustration. No, Catherine, she needs to hear this. We've tiptoed around it for too long. Diane, you've always been our burden to bear. Your siblings found their paths and followed them. You got a perfectly good education and squandered it, and now you're wasting your life on pipe dreams while working a job a teenager could do. The words landed like physical blows. Burden. The term crystallized years of subtle criticism, disappointed sighs, and conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Despite my preparation for the usual holiday criticism, hearing it stated so bluntly knocked the air from my lungs. The dining room blurred as tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. I'd given my family power over my emotional state. For too long. My hands trembled slightly as I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up. "Thank you for clarifying how you see me," I said, amazed at how calm I sounded. "I think it's best if I go now." "Diane, don't be dramatic," my sister said, glancing nervously at her fiancé. "Dad's just concerned about your future." "No, I think Dad was perfectly clear," I replied. "And for the record, my portfolio isn't just a few lucky picks. I've developed a systematic approach based on identifying overlooked value in emerging technologies, particularly in renewable energy and advanced materials. My returns aren't luck. They're the result of hundreds of hours of research and analysis." My father scoffed. "If you put half that energy into a real career—" "This is my career," I interrupted, something I rarely did with my father. "You just don't see it yet, but you will." The declaration hung in the air, bolder than I felt, but necessary to speak aloud. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the dining room, collected my coat and purse from the foyer, and left without looking back. The cold November air hit my face as I closed the front door behind me, carrying with it a sense of finality that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Inside my 10-year-old Honda Civic, I sat for a moment with my hands gripping the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. For years, I'd endured my family's dismissal of my interests and abilities, their constant comparisons to my more conventionally successful siblings. I'd smiled through countless backhanded compliments and well-meaning suggestions that I should lower my ambitions to something more realistic. But being called a burden, that was different. That was a line cross that couldn't be uncrossed. The hurt was profound, but beneath it, something else was emerging. Determination tinged with anger. I started the car and pulled away from the house where I'd grown up, the place that had shaped me but never quite understood me. The digital clock on my dashboard read 4:17 p.m., not even dinner time, and already I'd been ejected from the family. Celebration. Or more accurately, I'd ejected myself. Instead of heading back to my apartment, I drove to the small coffee shop near the community college where I sometimes went to work on my investment research. It would be quiet on Thanksgiving, a neutral space where I could think without the emotional weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me. The place was nearly empty, just a young barista who looked bored and a couple in the corner sharing a muffin. I ordered a large black coffee and settled into a booth by the window, pulling out my laptop from my bag. If I couldn't have dinner with my family, I would at least use the time productively. As my computer booted up, I found myself opening not my investment spreadsheets, but a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I began to type. 5-year plan. From burden to breakthrough. The title stared back at me, both a challenge and a promise. For too long, I'd kept my ambitions small, partly out of financial necessity but also from the fear instilled by years of family doubt. I'd been cautious with my investments, focusing on modest growth while working a job that barely used my skills, but offered the security my parents had always emphasized as important. But caution hadn't earned their respect. Neither had stability. Perhaps it was time to take the bigger risks I'd been researching but hesitant to pursue. I began outlining a more aggressive investment strategy, focusing on the sectors where my analysis showed the greatest potential for growth: specialized semiconductors, gene editing technologies, and advanced battery storage. I'd been following these industries closely, identifying specific companies that were undervalued based on their research pipelines and market positioning. Hours passed as I refined my plan, calculating potential returns alongside maximum acceptable losses. The coffee shop barista brought me a fresh cup without asking, offering a sympathetic smile that suggested she recognized another holiday refugee. By the time I closed my laptop, it was nearly 9 p.m., and I had a clear roadmap for the next 5 years. The plan was ambitious, leveraging my existing portfolio to make targeted investments in high-potential areas, taking calculated risks based on deep research rather than market hype, and gradually building enough capital to quit my day job and manage investments full-time. Looking at the numbers, I knew the plan was sound. The analysis was solid. The only missing ingredient was the courage to fully commit to it. As I drove back to my apartment, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from my mother and sister, expressing concern that I'd left so abruptly and suggesting I was overreacting to my father's honesty. I ignored them, focusing instead on the road ahead and the decision I'd just made. My apartment was a modest one-bedroom in a dated complex on the outskirts of Hartford. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, comfortable, and, most importantly, entirely mine. I kicked off my shoes at the door and headed straight for the second bedroom that I'd converted into a home office. Wall-to-wall bookshelves housed finance, texts, market analyses, and company reports. A large whiteboard displayed current investments and potential opportunities. My desk faced the window, giving me a view of a small courtyard garden that helped clear my mind when I'd been staring at numbers too long. This room was my real world, not the dining table where I'd been diminished earlier. Here, my abilities weren't questioned. They were proven daily in the growth of my modest but increasingly robust portfolio. I opened my safe and took out the leather-bound journal where I tracked my investment journey, noting major decisions and their outcomes. Flipping through the pages, I saw the evidence of my developing strategy. Early mistakes giving way to more sophisticated analyses. Cautious moves becoming increasingly confident as my understanding deepened. On a fresh page, I wrote the date and then, "Today I was called a burden. Tomorrow I begin proving otherwise." The words stared back at me, a contract with myself that felt more binding than any official document could be. The hurt of my father's words still lingered, but it was being transformed into something productive, a catalyst rather than a weight. I slept fitfully that night, waking several times from dreams where I was trying to explain complex investment strategies to my family, while they talked over me, their voices growing louder until mine was completely drowned out. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. Instead of checking the messages from my family that had continued to accumulate overnight, I made coffee and settled at my desk, pulling up the trading platform on my computer. It was Black Friday, and the market had opened for a half day of trading. I had $5,000 in savings that I'd been holding back as an emergency fund, a concession to the financial caution my parents had instilled in me. But my credit union job offered stability, my expenses were modest, and I had a small but growing side income from freelance financial writing. The greater emergency, I now realized, was the possibility of letting another year pass without fully committing to the path I believed in. After one final review of my research, I transferred the money to my investment account and executed the trades I'd planned the night before. Positions in 3 companies developing breakthrough technologies that my analysis suggested were significantly undervalued. It was the largest single investment move I'd ever made, and my hand trembled slightly as I clicked the final confirmation. "No longer a burden," I whispered to myself as the transactions processed. "From now on, I'm a breakthrough in progress." I didn't know then that those investments would be the first steps toward a portfolio that would eventually make financial headlines, or that the strategy I was developing would attract attention from people who'd never questioned my abilities. I couldn't foresee the opportunities that would open up, or the platform I would eventually have to help others find their own paths to financial independence. All I knew was that something fundamental had shifted inside me. The words spoken at that Thanksgiving table had been meant to diminish me, to force me into a conventional path that my family could understand and approve of. Instead, they had freed me from the need for that approval. For the first time, I was fully committed to my own vision, not one tempered by others' expectations. I closed my laptop and looked out the window at the late November sky, gray and heavy with the promise of snow. Winter was coming, but so was my spring, a season of growth that no one in my family could possibly imagine. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. December arrived with a flurry of snow and the usual holiday expectations. My phone continued to ping with messages from family members, varying from my mother's worried inquiries to my sister's exasperated demands that I stop being childish and apologize to our father for walking out on Thanksgiving. I responded minimally, sending brief assurances that I was fine but needed space. In truth, I didn't have time for family drama. Every moment not spent at my credit union job was devoted to deepening my investment knowledge and refining my strategy. The 3 companies I'd invested in on Black Friday were already showing promising movement, particularly Quantum Materials Corp., a semiconductor manufacturer developing specialized chips for artificial intelligence applications. Their recent patent approvals hadn't yet been fully recognized by the broader market, but my research indicated they were positioned to become essential suppliers in an expanding sector. When December bonuses were announced at work, I received a modest $1,200 acknowledgement of my reliability rather than any particular excellence. My branch manager, Sophia, delivered the news with an apologetic smile. "You're one of our most dependable team members, Diane," she said, sliding the envelope across her desk. "The customers love you." "Thank you," I replied, pocketing the envelope without looking inside. "I appreciate that. Have you given any thought to the assistant manager position opening up next quarter? It would be a step up for you." I hesitated. 6 months ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity. A salary increase, better title, slightly more interesting work. But the position would also mean longer hours and more responsibility, leaving less time for my investment research. "I'm considering my options," I said carefully. "Can I let you know after the holidays?" Sophia nodded, though her expression suggested disappointment. "Of course, but don't wait too long. There are others interested." As I walked back to my desk, I felt a strange sense of detachment from the concerns that had once dominated my professional thinking. The assistant manager role represented exactly the kind of safe, incremental advance my parents would approve of, a small step up the conventional ladder. Yet I found myself calculating how that time could be better spent, developing my investment portfolio, which had already shown greater returns than 5 years of such promotions would provide. That evening, I used my bonus to invest in a 4th company, a small biotech firm developing gene therapies that had recently published promising preliminary results, but had been overlooked due to broader market concerns about the sector. Their fundamentals were sound, their research pipeline robust, and their leadership team impeccably credentialed. The stock was trading at what I calculated to be a 40% discount to its intrinsic value. 3 days later, they announced a partnership with a major pharmaceutical company, and the stock jumped 22% in a single session. I watched the movement on my phone during my lunch break, a quiet smile playing at my lips as I calculated the implications for my growing portfolio. "Good news?" asked Terrence, a fellow customer service representative who had joined me in the break room. "Just watching an investment play out as expected," I replied, trying to temper my enthusiasm. I'd learned that most people's eyes glazed over when I spoke about market inefficiencies and value propositions. "You're into investing? Like stocks and stuff?" Terrence leaned forward with unexpected interest. "I've been thinking about getting into that. My brother-in-law keeps talking about his Robinhood account, but honestly, I have no idea where to start." I hesitated, unprepared for genuine interest in a subject my family had consistently dismissed. It's complicated, not something to jump into without research. But you've been successful? His gaze was direct, curious rather than skeptical. The question caught me off guard. Had I been successful? By my family's standards, certainly not. I still worked the same job, lived in the same apartment, drove the same car. But my portfolio had grown from $3,000 to nearly $25,000 in 2 years, with a significant acceleration in recent weeks since I'd committed fully to my strategy. I've seen good returns, I admitted, but it's not about quick gains. I focus on identifying undervalued companies with strong fundamentals and holding them as they realize their potential. That sounds more thoughtful than what my brother-in-law does. He just buys whatever is trending on Reddit. Terrence laughed. Any chance you'd be willing to share some tips? Maybe over coffee sometime? The request surprised me. In my family's shadow, I'd grown accustomed to downplaying my financial knowledge, presenting it as a quirky hobby rather than a serious pursuit. Having someone actually seek out my expertise was novel. I could do that, I said slowly. But I should warn you, I'm pretty conservative with recommendations. No get-rich-quick schemes. That's exactly what I want to avoid, Terrence assured me. I have a daughter starting college in 6 years. I need sensible approaches, not gambling. We arranged to meet that weekend at the same coffee shop where I'd crafted my 5-year plan on Thanksgiving night. As I prepared some basic materials to explain investment fundamentals, I found myself enjoying the process of organizing my knowledge for someone else's benefit. The concepts I'd internalized over years of study had become second nature, but articulating them for a beginner forced me to distill complex ideas into clearer principles. Terrence proved to be an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes as I explained the differences between value and growth investing, how to evaluate company fundamentals, and the importance of a long-term perspective. This is incredible, he said, as our second hour together drew to a close. You explain this stuff better than any of those YouTube investment gurus my brother-in-law follows. You should teach a class or something. I laughed, though the compliment warmed me. I'm not exactly qualified. No MBA, no finance credentials. So what? You've got real results and you can communicate. That's worth more than letters after your name. He gathered his notes. Would you be willing to meet again next week? I'd pay for a consultation. Seriously. The offer was flattering but uncomfortable. I'd never considered monetizing my knowledge. It had always been a personal pursuit, a private rebellion against my family's low expectations. Let's just keep it casual for now, I suggested. Friend helping friend. As December progressed, our coffee meetings became a regular Saturday morning event. Terrence began bringing colleagues who were also interested in learning about investing, and soon I found myself leading informal sessions for 4 or 5 people each weekend. They asked questions I'd never considered, challenged assumptions I'd taken for granted, and in the process, helped me refine my own thinking. Meanwhile, my portfolio continued its upward trajectory. The aggressive positions I'd taken after Thanksgiving were paying off even faster than my projections had suggested. Quantum Materials secured 2 major supply contracts. The biotech firm published additional positive data, and my battery storage investment benefited from new electric vehicle incentives announced in California. By Christmas Eve, my portfolio had crossed the $40,000 threshold, a figure that represented more money than I'd ever had at one time, yet still modest in the broader investment world. I celebrated quietly with a glass of wine in my apartment, declining invitations to both my parents' formal dinner and my sister's Christmas Eve cocktail party. Instead, I used the quiet evening to launch something I'd been considering for weeks, an investment blog where I could document my strategy and share insights. I called it Overlooked Value and wrote a simple mission statement. This blog tracks an experiment in long-term value investing, focusing on identifying companies with transformative potential that remain undervalued by conventional metrics. No get-rich-quick schemes, no day trading hype, just careful analysis and patient capital allocation. I published my first post that night, outlining my general approach without revealing specific holdings. I didn't expect anyone to read it, beyond perhaps the small group from my coffee shop sessions, but the act of putting my philosophy into words felt significant. A declaration of belief in my own judgment, despite years of being told I was wrong. Christmas Day brought the obligatory call with my parents, a stilted conversation where we carefully avoided any mention of Thanksgiving's confrontation or my current activities. My mother spoke about Vanessa's wedding plans and Marcus's children, while my father limited his contributions to occasional grunts of agreement. I offered bland updates about the credit union's holiday party and the unusually heavy snowfall in Hartford, maintaining the appearance of familial communication without any genuine exchange. "We're doing our usual New Year's gathering," my mother said as the call wound down. "Will you be joining us this year?" The annual Palmer family New Year's Eve party was a tradition dating back to my childhood. A formal affair where my parents invited colleagues, neighbors, and friends to welcome. The coming year with champagne and canapés. In recent years, it had become a showcase for my siblings' accomplishments, with my father proudly introducing Marcus as my son, the architectural visionary, and Vanessa as my daughter, crushing it at Harrington and Boyd. I was typically relegated to helping my mother in the kitchen or manning the coat room. "I have other plans this year," I lied smoothly. "But thank you for the invitation." My mother's disapproval radiated through the phone. "Family traditions matter, Diane, especially as your father and I get older." The guilt tactic was familiar, but it found less purchase than usual. "I understand, Mom. Maybe next year." After. Hanging up, I returned to my blog, drafting a post about the psychology of value investing, how the greatest opportunities often exist precisely because they trigger psychological discomfort, requiring investors to trust their research over market sentiment. As I wrote, I realized I was also describing my own journey, choosing a path that felt right despite constant external doubts. The post was more personal than I'd intended, weaving technical analysis with reflections on the courage required to hold unpopular positions. I published it impulsively, then spent the evening reviewing annual reports from companies on my watch list, identifying potential new positions for the coming year. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a productive blur. During the day, I handled year-end account inquiries at the credit union. Evenings and weekends were split between investment research, blog writing, and my increasingly popular coffee shop sessions, which had grown to include nearly a dozen regular attendees. On December 30th, I received an email that initially seemed like spam. A message from someone claiming to be an editor at Financial Pathways, a respected online publication covering personal finance and investment strategies. "Dear Ms. Palmer, I recently discovered your blog, Overlooked Value, and was impressed by your clear articulation of value investing principles applied to emerging technologies. Your analysis of how psychological barriers create market inefficiencies was particularly insightful. Financial Pathways is developing a series on alternative investment voices, perspectives from outside the traditional Wall Street ecosystem. We would be interested in featuring your approach in an upcoming article. If you're amenable, I'd like to schedule a conversation to discuss your investment philosophy and results in more detail. Sincerely, Eleanor Wright, Senior Editor, Financial Pathways. I stared at the message, certain it must be some kind of mistake or elaborate phishing attempt. A quick search confirmed that Eleanor Wright was indeed a senior editor at Financial Pathways, but the idea that she had somehow found my obscure blog with its handful of posts seemed implausible. With more curiosity than expectation, I replied, thanking her for her interest and agreeing to a conversation. To my surprise, she responded within the hour, suggesting a video call the following afternoon. That night, I barely slept, oscillating between excitement at the opportunity and anxiety about potential exposure. What if this led to scrutiny of my investment record? What if I made a fool of myself trying to explain concepts to a professional finance journalist? What if my family saw the article? The last concern gave me pause. Part of me still craved validation from the people who had dismissed me for so long. Yet another part recognized how that desire for approval had constrained me. The boldest moves in my portfolio, the ones yielding the greatest returns, had come after I stopped seeking my family's understanding. The video call with Eleanor was scheduled for 4 p.m. after my shift at the credit union. I raced home, changed into a more professional blouse, and hastily tidied the visible portion of my home office before logging on. Eleanor appeared on my screen precisely on time. A woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and rectangular glasses that gave her a scholarly appearance. "Ms. Palmer, thank you for making time to speak with me," she began with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not pulling you away from your investment research." "Please, call me Diane," I replied, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "And thank you for your interest in my blog. I'm still surprised you found it." "One of our research assistants is developing an algorithm to identify emerging financial voices outside traditional channels," Eleanor explained. "Your content scored remarkably high on both originality and analytical rigor. We were particularly interested in your focus areas: semiconductors, biotech, and energy storage. Those align with sectors we believe are undergoing fundamental transformation." The conversation flowed more easily than I'd anticipated. Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about my investment philosophy, my process for identifying opportunities, and my background. I found myself speaking with growing confidence about approaches I'd developed over years of independent study and practical application. "You mentioned that you work at a credit union," Eleanor noted after I'd explained my analysis of the specialized semiconductor sector. "May I ask how that relates to your investment work? Many of our readers are interested in how people balance careers with personal financial growth." The question touched on tensions I was still navigating. "My day job provides stability and a regular income stream to fund my investments," I explained. "But I've increasingly come to see my portfolio management as my true career, with the credit union position as supplementary rather than central to my professional identity." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perspective many would find valuable. The idea of redefining career success beyond conventional employment roles." She made a note before continuing. "I'm curious about your returns. Without revealing specific holdings, could you share your overall performance?" I hesitated, uncomfortable with what might seem like boasting. "My portfolio has grown significantly, particularly in the past 6 weeks. I've seen approximately 400% returns since inception 2 years ago, with an accelerated growth trajectory recently." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's impressive by any standard. Would you be willing to verify those returns for our article? We could work with percentage gains rather than absolute values to maintain your privacy." The request made sense, but it also increased the stakes. If my performance was publicly documented, there would be no hiding from either success or failure. Moving forward, after a moment's consideration, I agreed, explaining that I could provide redacted statements showing percentage movements without revealing specific holdings or amounts. As our call concluded, Eleanor outlined next steps. She would draft an article based on our conversation, I would provide verified return information, and the piece would likely run in mid-January as part of their Fresh Financial Voices series. "I think our readers will find your perspective valuable," she said, "especially your emphasis on deep research and psychological discipline. Too much financial content these days focuses on quick gains and trading gimmicks rather than fundamental analysis." After the call ended, I sat in my office chair, a mixture of excitement and trepidation washing over me. The opportunity to share my approach with Financial Pathways' substantial readership was beyond anything I'd imagined when starting my modest blog. Yet the prospect of public scrutiny, especially if it eventually reached my family, brought its own anxieties. The final day of the year arrived with a fresh snowfall that blanketed Hartford in pristine white. While my family gathered for their annual New Year's Eve celebration, I opted for a quiet evening at home, reviewing my portfolio's performance over the past year and planning my strategy for the coming one. The numbers were validating. My initially modest investments had grown substantially, with a particularly strong surge following my post-Thanksgiving commitment to a more aggressive approach. The 3 positions I'd added with my emergency fund had each exceeded expectations, contributing significantly to the overall growth. As midnight approached, I opened a bottle of champagne I'd splurged on. Not the most expensive, but a step up from my usual budget-conscious selections. I poured a single glass and carried it to my desk, where I'd prepared a simple ritual to mark the transition between years. On a piece of paper, I wrote down the limiting beliefs I was leaving behind. I need my family's approval to validate my choices. Financial success requires institutional credentials. Playing it safe is the responsible approach. Being a burden means having no value. On a second sheet, I listed the truths I was carrying forward. My research and analysis have proven effective. Independence from others' expectations creates freedom for growth. Calculated risks based on thorough research are not irresponsible. I create value through my unique perspective and approach. As the clock struck midnight and fireworks exploded in the distance, I raised my glass in a solitary toast. To overlooked value, I whispered, in markets and in people. The first week of January brought an unexpected development. Eleanor's article, originally scheduled for mid-month publication, was bumped up to the first Friday of the year as part of Financial Pathways, New Year, New Financial Perspectives special feature. She emailed me the final draft for approval on Wednesday evening. The headline made me catch my breath. The Overlooked Analyst: How Customer Service Rep Diane Palmer Built a Portfolio That Outperforms Wall Street Pros. The article itself was thoughtful and detailed, presenting my investment approach with a respect I'd never received from my family. Eleanor had framed my story as one of independent thinking and methodical analysis, highlighting how my focus on undervalued companies in transformative sectors had yielded returns that beat most professional funds. She'd been careful to note that my strategy involved careful research rather than risky speculation, and had included my emphasized points about the importance of patience and psychological discipline. The piece concluded with a quote from our interview. Success in value investing isn't about having prestigious degrees or insider connections, Palmer explains. It's about developing the confidence to trust your research when it contradicts popular sentiment, and the patience to wait for the market to recognize what you've already discovered. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from overlooked perspectives. I approved the draft with minimal changes, simultaneously thrilled and terrified about seeing my name and investment philosophy presented to Financial Pathways' substantial readership. The article was scheduled to go live at 6 a.m. on Friday. Thursday night I barely slept, oscillating between excitement and anxiety about the coming exposure. By 5:30 a.m., I'd given up on rest and was sitting at my desk with a strong cup of coffee, refreshing the Financial Pathways website repeatedly until the article appeared. There it was, featured prominently on the homepage with my name in the headline. The accompanying photo, which I'd provided from my LinkedIn profile, showed me looking more confident than I typically felt, a version of myself I was still growing into. I read the article again, seeing my words and ideas presented professionally in a respected publication. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold. This was so far from being the family burden that the contrast was almost laughable. My phone chimed with a text message notification. It was Terrence. Just saw you on Financial Pathways. Amazing. We're all so proud of you. The coffee shop crew is buzzing. More messages followed as members of my informal investment group discovered the article. Their excitement was genuine and uncomplicated by the history of doubt that colored my family. Relationships. At work, Sophia stopped by my desk mid-morning, her expression curious. One of our commercial clients just mentioned seeing an article about you in Financial Pathways. Is that true? I nodded, unsure how she would react to my side pursuit. They were doing a feature on non-traditional investment approaches. That's unexpected. She studied me with new interest. I had no idea you were so involved in investment analysis. Is that why you've been hesitant about the assistant manager position? The question was direct, requiring an equally direct answer. Partly, yes. I've been developing a parallel career that's becoming increasingly important to me. Instead of the disapproval I half expected, Sophia nodded thoughtfully. I respect the transparency, and I'm impressed. Financial Pathways is no small platform. She paused. If you're interested, our investment services department might be worth considering. It would align better with your evident skills than customer service. The offer was unexpected but logical, a bridge between my day job and growing passion. I'd be open to discussing that, I replied carefully. As the day progressed, the article gained traction in financial circles. My blog, previously visited by only a handful of readers, saw traffic spike dramatically. My email inbox filled with messages from strangers asking for investment advice, podcast hosts requesting interviews, and even a literary agent inquiring if I'd considered writing a book. By evening, the article had been shared thousands of times across various finance-focused social media groups. Comments ranged from skepticism about my lack of formal credentials to admiration for my demonstrated results. A few established financial commentators had reshared it, adding their own observations about the value of diverse perspectives in market analysis. I sat at my desk that night, watching the unexpected ripples of recognition spread outward, creating opportunities I'd never anticipated when I'd walked out of my parents' dining room on Thanksgiving. The family that had labeled me a burden had no idea that I was now being recognized for exactly the qualities they had dismissed. For a moment, I was tempted to forward the article to them, to demand the acknowledgement they had withheld for so long. But something stopped me. My success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. Their validation, or lack thereof, had shaped my past but didn't need to determine my future. Instead, I opened my investment platform and methodically reviewed my positions, making minor adjustments based on recent developments. The work itself, the careful analysis, the thoughtful allocation of resources, the patient positioning for future growth, brought a satisfaction deeper than any external recognition could provide. The path forward was becoming clearer. Continue building my portfolio with the same disciplined approach, develop my blog into a more comprehensive resource, explore the opportunity in the credit union's investment services department, and perhaps even consider the book proposal that now seemed possible. The burden was transforming into something else entirely, a breakthrough that no one, least of all my family, had seen coming. January unfolded with unexpected momentum. The Financial Pathways article had triggered a cascade of opportunities I hadn't anticipated when I'd walked out of my parents' house on Thanksgiving. My inbox overflowed with messages, readers seeking advice, industry professionals expressing interest in my approach, and media outlets requesting interviews. One email particularly caught my attention, a message from Vanguard Capital, a boutique investment firm specializing in technology and healthcare sectors. Their managing director, Lawrence Chen, wanted to discuss my analysis of emerging semiconductor companies over a virtual coffee. "We've been tracking similar patterns in the specialized chip space," he wrote, But your identification of quantum materials potential ahead of their contract announcements was impressively prescient. I'd value your perspective on several related opportunities we're evaluating. The request was surreal. A managing director at a respected firm seeking my opinion as a peer rather than dismissing me as an amateur. I scheduled the call for the following evening, then spent hours preparing, reviewing my research notes and recent industry developments to ensure I could speak with authority. The conversation with Lawrence proved to be transformative. He began by complimenting the Financial Pathways article, then quickly moved into detailed questions about my analytical framework. What metrics did I prioritize when evaluating early-stage tech companies? How did I weigh potential regulatory impacts? What indicators suggested management could execute on promising research? As we spoke, I realized Lawrence wasn't just being polite. He was genuinely engaging with my ideas, challenging assumptions and offering counterpoints that pushed my thinking. The discussion evolved into a collaborative exploration of market inefficiencies in specialized tech sectors, with each of us building on the other's observations. Your perspective is refreshing, Lawrence said as our scheduled 30-minute call stretched past an hour. You're seeing connections that many institutional analysts miss because they're too siloed in traditional evaluation frameworks. I've had the luxury of developing my approach outside institutional constraints, I replied. No investment committee to please, no quarterly performance pressure. Lawrence chuckled. A mixed blessing. Freedom of thought, but limited capital to deploy. He paused. Have you considered how your strategy might scale with greater resources? The question caught me off guard. My investment approach had been developed for my personal portfolio, with position sizes constrained by my modest credit union salary and careful savings. I'd never considered how it might function with institutional-level capital. I suppose the core principles would remain the same, I ventured, though position sizing and liquidity considerations would require adjustment. Exactly the right thinking, Lawrence nodded approvingly. Listen, I'd like to continue this conversation. Vanguard is expanding our emerging technologies division, and we're assembling a team that can identify value in transformative sectors before conventional metrics reflect it. Would you be open to discussing potential involvement with our firm? The suggestion was so unexpected that I struggled to formulate a response. I don't have the traditional qualifications your analysts typically bring, I finally managed. No MBA. No experience at major financial institutions. And yet you've demonstrated more insight into these sectors than many credential-heavy applicants we've interviewed, Lawrence countered. Results speak louder than resumes, Diane. Think about it. No pressure, but I believe there could be a fit here that benefits us both. After we disconnected, I sat at my desk in stunned silence. A legitimate investment firm was interested in my approach, not as a curiosity, but as a potentially valuable addition to their team. The validation was dizzying after years of having my financial interests dismissed as unrealistic by my family. The next morning at the credit union, I requested a meeting with Sophia to discuss the investment services department opportunity she'd mentioned. The conversation took an unexpected turn when I shared Lawrence's interest. Vanguard Capital is reaching out to you? Sophia's professional composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine surprise. That's significant. They're small but highly respected in the industry. It's preliminary, I emphasized. But yes, they've expressed interest in my investment approach. Sophia studied me with new consideration. Our investment services role would be a step up from your current position, but it sounds like you might have options that go beyond what we can offer. She leaned forward. Can I ask, why have you stayed in customer service this long when you clearly have more specialized skills? The question struck at tensions I was only now fully confronting. Stability, I admitted. A regular paycheck while I developed my investment strategy. And honestly, limited confidence that anyone would take my financial analysis seriously without the standard credentials. And now? Now I'm reconsidering those assumptions. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. As you should. I hope you'll keep us in the loop about your plans, but I understand if your path takes you elsewhere. You've been an asset to our team. The acknowledgement was simple but meaningful. Recognition of value from someone who had only seen a fraction of my capabilities until recently. That evening, I had my regular Saturday investment session at the coffee shop, now attended by nearly 20 people ranging from college students to retirees. The dynamic had shifted subtly since the Financial Pathways article. Attendees treated my insights with heightened respect, and new participants arrived with the article pulled up on their phones. I implemented the evaluation framework you suggested last week, shared Michelle, a high school science teacher who had been attending since December. It helped me avoid a biotech stock that looked promising, but failed your management competence criteria. The company announced production delays yesterday and dropped 15%. The framework isn't about avoiding all losses, I cautioned. It's about tilting probability in your favor through systematic evaluation. Still, it saved me from an impulsive decision, Michelle replied. That's progress for someone who used to invest based on headlines. As the session continued, I found myself increasingly aware of how much I enjoyed these teaching interactions. The moment when complex concepts clicked for someone, the shared excitement when an analytical approach revealed hidden value, the community forming around a common interest in thoughtful investing. By the time I returned to my apartment, new messages had accumulated. Among them was an email from a producer at Financial Insight Network, a respected online platform featuring investment commentary and analysis. Ms. Palmer, your recent profile in Financial Pathways caught our attention, particularly your unconventional path to investment success. Fin is developing a new segment focused on emerging voices in financial analysis, and we believe your perspective would resonate with our audience. Would you be interested in recording a short analytical piece, 5-7 minutes, discussing your approach to identifying overlooked value in technology sectors? This would be professionally produced, but can be recorded remotely. Best regards, Julian Mercer, Senior Content Producer. Fin a year ago. Even 2 months ago, I would have dismissed such an opportunity as beyond my reach. Another reminder of the gap between my aspirations and credentials. Now, with growing external validation of my approach, the invitation seemed less intimidating than energizing. I replied with a carefully worded acceptance, suggesting several specific topics that might interest their audience while aligning with my expertise. Julian responded within hours, enthusiastic about my suggestion to analyze overlooked opportunities in the intersection of advanced materials and renewable energy technologies. We scheduled the recording for the following week, which meant I needed to develop a concise, compelling presentation that demonstrated my analytical approach without revealing my specific holdings. The preparation forced me to distill years of research into clear principles and illustrative examples. An aha exercise that clarified my own thinking, even as I organized it for others. The night before the recording, as I reviewed my notes one final time, my phone lit up with my sister's name. Vanessa had been calling periodically since Thanksgiving, her messages growing increasingly insistent as family events approached and passed without my presence. I'd maintained minimal contact, responding to direct questions but avoiding deeper engagement. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Diane, finally. Vanessa's voice carried the familiar edge of exasperation. Mom's birthday dinner is next. Saturday. You're expected to be there. No greeting, no inquiry about my well-being. Just an assumption of compliance with family expectations. The demand might have intimidated me months ago, triggering the familiar guilt response that had kept me tethered to family obligations despite consistent dismissal of my choices and interests. I have a prior commitment, I replied calmly. Please, wish Mom a happy birthday for me. I'll send a gift. Are you still sulking about Thanksgiving? Dad was just being honest. You know how he gets after a few drinks. The family needs to move past this. The characterization of my boundary setting as sulking was so predictably dismissive that I almost laughed. I'm not sulking, Vanessa. I'm prioritizing commitments that matter to me. What commitment could possibly be more important than Mom's birthday? The incredulity in her voice was genuine. She truly couldn't imagine what in my life could take precedence over family. Obligations. I considered telling her about the Financial Insight Network recording scheduled for that day, about Lawrence Chen's interest in my investment approach, about the community I was building around financial education. I weighed the potential satisfaction of finally having tangible achievements to counter years of subtle diminishment. But something stopped me. These new developments weren't prizes to be displayed for family approval. They were manifestations of the path I'd chosen despite family skepticism. Their value didn't depend on external validation, especially from people who had consistently doubted my judgment. It's a professional opportunity, I said simply. I've committed to it and won't cancel. Professional opportunity? Vanessa's tone shifted from exasperation to curiosity. What kind of opportunity? Did you finally apply for that supervisor position at the credit union? The assumption that a promotion within my existing job was the upper limit of my ambition was so perfectly aligned with my family's limited vision for me that it crystallized my decision not to explain further. It's related to my investment. Work? I replied. I'll call Mom on her birthday and visit another time. Investment work, Vanessa repeated, the skepticism evident in her voice. You mean your stock-picking hobby? Diane, you need to focus on real career advancement, not playing around with your savings. Dad's right about, I need to go, I interrupted. A rare assertion in our family dynamic where my siblings and parents typically controlled conversational flow. I have preparation to complete for tomorrow. Give my love to James and let Mom know I'll call her next week. I ended the call before she could protest, feeling a strange mixture of discomfort and liberation. The familiar pressure to conform to family expectations still carried emotional weight, but its influence over my decisions had diminished significantly. The path I'd chosen, developing my investment expertise, sharing knowledge with others, building a platform for financial education, had begun generating its own momentum, independent of family approval. The recording for Financial Insight Network the next day went remarkably well. Julian provided expert guidance on delivery and pacing, helping me transform my detailed analysis into accessible content without sacrificing intellectual substance. The resulting 7-minute segment presented a compelling case for identifying overlooked value in companies developing advanced materials for next-generation solar applications, a sector where my research indicated significant growth potential that conventional metrics hadn't yet fully captured. This is excellent, Julian said after we finished the final take. Clear, substantive analysis presented in a way that respects the audience's intelligence while remaining accessible to non-specialists. Exactly what we're looking for in this series. Thank you, I replied, slightly embarrassed by the praise but also recognizing the truth in it. I had developed genuine expertise worth sharing. I enjoyed the process more than expected. It shows. Julian nodded approvingly. Would you be open to recording additional segments if this one resonates with our audience? We're developing this as an ongoing series, and your perspective is distinctive. The opportunity to regularly share investment insights through a respected platform was both exciting and intimidating. It would require consistent preparation alongside my existing commitments, the credit union job, my growing portfolio management, the coffee shop sessions, and the increasingly popular blog. Yet it also represented exactly the kind of platform I'd once thought unattainable without conventional credentials, a chance to influence financial discourse based on demonstrated insight rather than institutional affiliation. I'd be interested, I confirmed, particularly if we can explore interconnected themes across episodes rather than isolated topics. Even better, Julian agreed. A cohesive analytical framework across different sectors would give viewers a deeper understanding of your approach. The segment was scheduled to air the following Tuesday. The same day, I had a follow-up call with Lawrence Chen to discuss potential involvement with Vanguard Capital. My professional landscape was transforming rapidly, presenting opportunities that would have seemed impossible when I'd walked out of my parents' house on Thanksgiving. In preparation for my conversation with Lawrence, I drafted a memo outlining how my investment approach might be adapted for institutional application, addressing considerations like position sizing, liquidity management, and risk distribution across a larger portfolio. The exercise forced me to think beyond my personal investment context, expanding my framework to encompass institutional requirements without compromising the core insights that had driven my success. The morning of the Financial Insight Network segment release, I woke to an email from Julian with a preview link. Watching myself deliver sophisticated financial analysis on a professional platform was surreal. A visual representation of the transformation occurring in my professional identity. The person on screen spoke with confidence about market inefficiencies and overlooked value opportunities, her expertise evident in the nuanced analysis and precise terminology. That same person had been dismissed as a burden at Thanksgiving dinner just months earlier. By mid-morning, the segment had been posted to Financial Insight Network's main page and their various social media channels. Comments accumulated rapidly, predominantly positive, with viewers appreciating the substantive analysis delivered without the hyperbole common in financial media. Finally, someone talking about actual fundamentals instead of meme stocks and crypto moonshots. Incredibly clear explanation of how to evaluate early-stage materials companies. Subscribed. Where has this analyst been hiding? More content like this, please? My phone buzzed with a text from Lawrence. Excellent segment on Fin. Looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. The validation was gratifying, but what surprised me most was how it failed to trigger the familiar craving for family approval. I didn't feel compelled to share the segment with my parents or siblings. Didn't imagine scenarios where they finally acknowledged the legitimacy of my financial expertise. The external recognition was satisfying in its own right, independent of its potential to change family dynamics. That afternoon, my call with Lawrence evolved from exploratory conversation to concrete opportunity. Vanguard Capital was interested in bringing me on as a specialized analyst focusing on emerging technologies, a role that would utilize my demonstrated expertise while providing institutional resources to expand my research capabilities. We're prepared to make a formal offer, Lawrence explained as our discussion progressed. The compensation would be significantly above your current position, with performance incentives tied to portfolio returns in your coverage areas. The opportunity represented everything I'd been working toward: professional recognition of my investment approach, resources to expand my research, and compensation that reflected my demonstrated capabilities rather than my lack of conventional credentials. I'd need to transition responsibly from my current position, I noted, already mentally calculating notice periods and knowledge transfer requirements. Of course, Lawrence agreed. We respect professionalism. Take the time you need to conclude your credit union role properly. We're more interested in your long-term contribution than in rushing your start date. By the end of the call, we had outlined terms that seemed almost unreal. A salary more than triple my credit union compensation, performance bonuses based on the success of investments in my coverage areas, and flexibility to continue my educational coffee shop sessions and Financial Insight Network segments as personal projects. As I hung up, the contrast between my current reality and my Thanksgiving position was stark. In just over 2 months, I'd gone from being called a burden at my family dinner to receiving a job offer that validated years of independent study and analysis. The transformation wasn't accidental. It had required courage to walk away from family expectations, discipline to commit fully to my investment approach, and confidence to share my expertise despite lacking conventional credentials. I opened my portfolio management platform, looking at the positions that had driven my success. Companies I'd identified through careful research when conventional wisdom had overlooked their potential. Their growth mirrored my own journey from overlooked value to recognized potential. My phone lit up with my mother's name. The third call from her this week about the upcoming birthday dinner. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, as I had with previous attempts. But something had shifted in me. A new confidence that allowed engagement without vulnerability to old patterns. I answered, ready to navigate family dynamics from a position of newfound strength rather than defensive withdrawal. The conversation ahead might be difficult, but I was no longer the same person who had left their dining room on Thanksgiving. The burden had transformed into breakthrough, regardless of whether my family was ready to recognize it. "Diane, you're deliberately sabotaging this family," my mother said, her voice tight with frustration. "Your absence at my birthday dinner will be noticed by everyone." I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, watching snow fall outside my apartment window. The weather matched the chill in our conversation. Beautiful from a distance, but uncomfortable up close. "I'm not trying to sabotage anything, Mom," I replied, maintaining an even tone. "I have a professional commitment that I can't reschedule. I'll visit the weekend after and take you to lunch at that French bistro you like." What professional commitment could possibly be more important than family? You work at a credit union, Diane, not the United Nations. The dismissal was so familiar that it barely stung anymore. "Actually, I've been offered a new position." The words emerged before I'd fully decided to share them. "As an investment analyst at Vanguard Capital." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. I could almost see my mother's face, the narrow-eyed skepticism, the slight downturn of her lips that appeared whenever I shared something that didn't align with her perception of my capabilities. "An investment analyst?" she finally said. "Is this another one of your hobby ventures?" The hesitation spoke volumes. In my family's eyes, my financial interests had always been categorized as unserious, a diversion rather than a legitimate pursuit worthy of respect. "No, Mom. It's a formal position with a boutique investment firm that specializes in technology and healthcare sectors. They're interested in my analytical approach to identifying undervalued companies in emerging technologies." Another pause. "I see." Her tone suggested she didn't see at all. "And this conflicts with my birthday dinner because—" I suppressed a sigh. "I have a recording for Financial Insight Network that afternoon. It was scheduled weeks ago, and many people are involved. I can't reschedule without inconveniencing their entire production team." "Financial Insight Network?" A new note entered. Her voice, confusion tinged with the first hint of uncertainty. "The investment channel your father sometimes watches?" "Yes, that's the one. They've invited me to share my analysis of certain market sectors as part of a new series they're developing." The third silence was different from the previous two, less dismissive, more processing. I could almost hear the gears turning as my mother attempted to reconcile this information with her established view of her underachieving oldest daughter. "Does your father know about this?" she finally asked. The question crystallized everything about our family dynamics. My achievements weren't real until validated by my father, the family's arbiter of success and failure, whose judgment had shaped our hierarchy for decades. "I haven't discussed it with Dad," I replied. "Or anyone. In the family, actually. My professional development has been separate from family interactions recently." "Well," my mother said, her voice regaining its composure, "perhaps you should bring it up when you visit the weekend after my birthday. Your father might have some advice about this opportunity." The suggestion that I needed my father's guidance on a field where I'd demonstrated expertise while he had none was so perfectly on brand for my family that I nearly laughed. Instead, I agreed noncommittally. and steered the conversation towards safer topics: Vanessa's wedding plans, Marcus's children, neighborhood happenings, before ending the call with promises to send a birthday gift and visit soon. The interaction left me thoughtful rather than upset. My mother's reaction, initial dismissal followed by confused recalibration when confronted with external validation, likely previewed how the rest of my family would respond to my changing professional circumstances. The pattern was predictable: doubt anything I pursued until someone else legitimized it, then attempt to incorporate this new information without acknowledging their previous skepticism. My phone chimed with an email notification from Julian at Financial Insight Network. The first segment had performed exceptionally well, generating more viewer engagement than any other recent content on their platform. They wanted to accelerate production on additional segments, potentially developing a recurring monthly feature focused on my emerging technology value analysis. Viewer feedback indicates your straightforward, substantive approach is resonating strongly, particularly with our core audience of serious retail investors, Julian wrote. There's clear appetite for investment content that respects viewers' intelligence while making complex analysis accessible. Your segment hit that sweet spot perfectly. The validation reinforced what I'd begun to recognize: my burden status within my family had no correlation with my value in professional contexts, where results mattered more than preconceptions. The contrast was illuminating and liberating. The following day, I submitted my formal resignation at the credit union. Sophia received the news with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. "I can't say I'm surprised after our recent conversations," she said, reviewing the letter. "Though I had hoped we might find a role that would keep you with us. Vanguard. Capital is an excellent opportunity." "Thank you for understanding," I replied, genuinely appreciative of her support. The credit union has provided stability during an important developmental period for me. Sophia smiled. "That's an uncommonly gracious way to describe a position you've clearly outgrown." She closed my resignation letter. "We'll miss you, Diane, but I'm looking forward to seeing where your investment approach takes you. Perhaps someday we'll be reading about the Palmer investment strategy in financial textbooks." The comment was meant kindly, but it landed with unexpected weight. I'd been so focused on proving my approach worked that I hadn't considered its potential broader impact or legacy. Could the analytical framework I'd developed through years of independent study eventually influence investment methodology beyond my personal portfolio? The possibility was both thrilling and intimidating. My 2-week notice period passed in a blur of knowledge transfer and preparation for my new role. I created detailed documentation for my credit union responsibilities, trained my replacement, and spent evenings preparing for my transition to Vanguard. Lawrence had shared their onboarding materials early, allowing me to familiarize myself with their systems and research protocols before my official start date. The Saturday morning before my final week at the credit union, I held my regular coffee shop investment session, now attended by nearly 30 people ranging from college students to retirees. The group had evolved from casual conversations to structured discussions, with regular attendees building on concepts from previous weeks and newcomers absorbing fundamental principles. "I have an announcement to make," I said toward the end of our session. "Next Saturday will be our last meeting at this location. I've accepted a position as an investment analyst with Vanguard Capital, which will require relocation to Boston." The news was met with a chorus of congratulations tinged with evident disappointment. "That's amazing, Diane," Michelle said. "But what happens to our group? These sessions have changed how I approach investing completely." Others nodded in agreement, sharing how the Saturday meetings had transformed their financial decision-making. The impact of these informal educational sessions, which I'd started simply to help a colleague understand investing basics, had expanded far beyond my expectations. "I've been thinking about that," I admitted. "With your permission, I'd like to record our final in-person session covering the core analytical framework we've developed together. I'll make it available online along with reference materials and examples. Just one session isn't enough, protested Terrence, who had attended from the beginning. There's too much valuable content to compress into a single recording. His concern sparked a discussion about alternative approaches, a series of recorded sessions, a written guide, or even a private online community where the group could continue sharing insights. The enthusiasm reinforced what I'd gradually come to recognize. The value I created extended beyond my personal investment returns to include knowledge transmission that empowered others. What if we did all of those things? I suggested as the conversation continued. A comprehensive approach that captures what we've built here and makes it accessible to others? By the time our session concluded, we had outlined a plan. 4 recorded sessions covering fundamental principles, a written guide expanding on key concepts, and an online forum where participants could continue their collaborative learning. I committed to developing these resources before my relocation to Boston the following month. The project would require significant time alongside my remaining credit union responsibilities and preparation for my Vanguard role, but it felt important. A way of honoring the community that had formed around shared learning when my family had dismissed those same interests. That evening, I returned to my apartment to find a package outside my door, a birthday gift for my mother that I'd ordered earlier in the week. Opening the box, I examined the elegant silver photo frame containing a restored image of my parents, on their wedding day, smiling with uncomplicated happiness before decades of expectations and disappointments had accumulated between them. I wrapped it carefully, composing a simple card that expressed genuine wishes for her happiness without apologizing for my absence from the celebration. The completed package sat on my counter, ready for mailing on Monday, a symbol of continuing family connection reshaped by new boundaries. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unfamiliar number. Opening it revealed a link to an article in the Wall Street Journal's personal finance section titled Unconventional Paths to Financial Expertise: The Rising Influence of Self-Taught Analysts. The accompanying message read, "Thought you might find this interesting." Your Financial Insight Network segment was referenced. Lawrence. The article discussed emerging trends in financial analysis, highlighting how traditional credential pathways were being supplemented by individuals who had developed expertise through independent study and practical application. My Fin segment was mentioned alongside several other examples of emerging voices gaining influence through demonstrated insight rather than institutional affiliation. The reference was brief but significant, acknowledgement in a prestigious financial publication that would have seemed impossible when I'd walked out of my parents' Thanksgiving dinner just months earlier. I forwarded the link to Julian at Fin with a note of thanks for the platform that had helped amplify my perspective. His response came quickly. "This is just the beginning, Diane. Your approach has resonated because it combines analytical rigor with accessibility, a rare combination in financial media. We're receiving requests for more segments featuring your technology sector analysis." The external validation continued to accumulate, creating a stark contrast with my family's persistent skepticism. Each professional recognition reinforced what I'd begun to internalize. My value wasn't defined by my family's limited perception, but by the tangible impact of my work, both in investment returns and in knowledge shared with others. My final week at the credit union was marked by small celebrations and goodbyes. Colleagues who had barely noticed me during my years in customer service now expressed surprise at my departure for an investment firm, their reactions highlighting how thoroughly I'd compartmentalized my professional identity until recently. "I had no idea you were so into stocks and stuff," remarked Brian from the mortgage department during my modest farewell gathering. "Always figured you'd move up to branch management eventually." "I've been developing my investment approach for years," I explained. "It just wasn't visible in my credit union role." "Well, good for you," he said with evident sincerity. "Breaking into that world without the usual pedigree can't have been easy." His observation was accurate but incomplete. The greater challenge hadn't been convincing investment professionals to take me seriously. Their judgment was ultimately based on results rather than credentials. The more persistent barrier had been my own internalization of my family's limited expectations, the voice of doubt that had kept me in a customer service role long after my investment expertise had surpassed the value of that position's stability. Saturday arrived, my final in-person investment session at the coffee shop and the day of my mother's birthday dinner. The morning gathering had a bittersweet quality, with regular attendees bringing small gifts and cards expressing gratitude for the knowledge I'd shared. We recorded nearly 3 hours of content covering core analytical principles, practical applications, and common pitfalls in value investing. This isn't an ending, I assured the group as we concluded. It's an evolution. The online community we're creating will allow us to continue learning together, just in a different format. Michelle approached me as others were packing up. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said quietly. "When I started attending these sessions, I was $28,000 in credit card debt from poor financial decisions after my divorce. Using the principles you've taught us, I've eliminated that debt and started building actual investments. It's changed my entire relationship with money." Her disclosure caught me off guard. I'd known Michelle was implementing the analytical framework we'd discussed, but I hadn't realized the broader impact on her financial circumstances. "That's incredible progress," I said, genuinely moved. "The discipline and consistency required to overcome that level of debt while starting to invest is remarkable." "I couldn't have done it without these Saturday sessions," she insisted. "You made complex concepts accessible when everyone else in the financial world seemed to be speaking a foreign language. That's a genuine gift, Diane." As I drove home from the coffee shop, Michelle's words lingered in my thoughts. The impact of knowledge shared had tangible consequences beyond investment returns, reshaping someone's financial trajectory and, by extension, their available choices and opportunities. The realization deepened my commitment to the educational resources we were developing, expanding their potential reach beyond our original small group. My apartment felt different as I entered it that afternoon, less like a temporary way station and more like a launching pad from which I was advancing intentionally rather than simply marking time. In just 3 weeks, I would be relocating to Boston to begin my role at Vanguard Capital, moving into a company-subsidized apartment, while I established myself in the city where my sister had already planted her flag in the legal world. The geography of our family dynamics would be shifting. Vanessa and I in Boston, Marcus and his family in the suburbs, our parents still in the family home in Connecticut. Proximity would create new possibilities for interaction, along with new challenges in maintaining the boundaries I'd established since Thanksgiving. My phone buzzed with notifications as family members began gathering for my mother's birthday dinner. Photos appeared in our family group chat. My father pouring wine in the dining room, Vanessa arranging flowers, Marcus's children in formal clothes they clearly found uncomfortable. My absence was conspicuous but unremarked upon in the messages, though I could imagine the muffled conversations happening outside the digital record. I sent a simple text, "Happy birthday, Mom. Your gift should arrive Monday. Looking forward to taking you to lunch next weekend." My mother's response came quickly. "Thank you, dear. We miss you this evening." The exchange was cordial, but carried undercurrents of unresolved tension. I set my phone aside and turned to my laptop, opening a document I'd been working on throughout the week. A comprehensive guide to my investment approach, integrating the material from our recorded sessions with expanded examples and analytical frameworks. Hours passed as I refined the content, transforming tacit knowledge developed through years of practice into explicit principles that others could apply. The process was clarifying, forcing me to articulate connections and patterns I'd internalized, but not always consciously named. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang, my father's name appearing on the screen. I stared at it for several rings, debating whether to answer. Our last direct interaction had been at Thanksgiving when he'd called me a burden. We'd communicated only through group messages since then, maintaining minimal contact without addressing the breach. I answered just before the call would have gone to voicemail. "Hello, Dad." "Diane?" His voice carried the slight gruffness that appeared after several drinks, not impaired but loosened. "Your mother had a nice birthday dinner. She appreciated the text. I'm glad to hear that. She should receive my gift on Monday." An awkward silence expanded between us, the space where casual conversation should flow but couldn't bridge the unacknowledged rift. "Your mother mentioned something. About a new job," he finally said, "at an investment place." The deliberate vagueness was telling. He couldn't bring himself to name Vanguard Capital or acknowledge the specificity of an analyst role, reducing my professional advancement to a job at an investment place. "Yes, I've accepted a position as an investment analyst with Vanguard Capital in Boston. I start in 3 weeks." Another silence, longer than the first. I could almost hear him processing this information, trying to fit it into his established view of his underperforming eldest daughter. "How did that come about?" he finally asked, his tone a mixture of skepticism and genuine curiosity. I considered how to respond. The comprehensive explanation would include the Financial Pathways article, the blog that had attracted their attention, the coffee shop investment group, the Financial Insight Network segments, and the Wall Street Journal mention, a sequence of events catalyzed by walking out of his house on Thanksgiving after being called a burden. "My investment analysis caught their attention," I said simply. "Particularly my work identifying undervalued companies in specialized technology sectors." "I see." He cleared his throat. "Well, Boston is expensive. Do they pay analysts well? At these boutique firms?" The question was so quintessentially my father, focusing on financial metrics as the primary measure of legitimacy, that I almost smiled despite myself. "The compensation is significant," I replied. "More than triple my credit union salary, with performance incentives tied to my coverage areas." This disclosure produced the longest silence yet. When my father spoke again, his voice had lost its skeptical edge, replaced by something I rarely heard directed toward me. Respect tinged with surprise. "Triple your current salary? That's substantial. And they're providing this based on your investment record?" "Yes. Results speak louder than credentials in this field, Dad. My portfolio performance over the past 2 years has significantly outpaced market averages." For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, my father seemed genuinely at a loss for words. His worldview, where success followed prescribed pathways through elite institutions and traditional credentials, couldn't easily accommodate my unconventional advancement. "Well," he finally managed, "this is unexpected news. You should tell the family more about this when you visit next weekend." The invitation was clear, an opportunity to reintegrate into family gatherings, now that my professional status had been upgraded to something they might recognize as legitimate. The dynamics were transparent. External validation had made me worthy of renewed family attention. "I'll be taking Mom to lunch on Saturday," I reminded him. "I have commitments Sunday with the investment group I've been leading at a local coffee shop." "Investment group?" The surprise in his voice was evident. "You lead an investment group?" "For the past several months, yes. We're transitioning to an online format since I'm relocating to Boston." Another adjustment to his mental image of me. Not just someone who had landed a lucrative position, but someone who shared expertise with others who valued it. The cumulative effect of these revelations was palpable even through the phone. "Your mother would appreciate if you joined us for dinner Saturday evening after your lunch," he said. "Vanessa and James will be down from Boston. They could give you insights about neighborhoods since you'll be moving there soon." The invitation represented a step toward family reintegration, offered now that my professional status had been elevated to something they recognized as valuable. I was no longer the burden of Thanksgiving, but a family member with newfound social capital they might access. "I'll consider it," I replied, neither accepting nor declining. "It depends how the day unfolds." The non-committal response was unlike my historical pattern of immediate accommodation to family expectations. My father noticed the shift, his silence communicating surprise at not receiving automatic agreement. "Well, let us know," he finally said. "Your mother would be pleased to have everyone together." After we disconnected, I sat with the transformative realization that our conversation represented. My father's perception of me had begun shifting based on external recognition of value he hadn't previously acknowledged. The investment expertise he had dismissed as a hobby was now registering as legitimate because others, Vanguard Capital, Financial Insight Network, the Wall Street Journal, had validated it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very qualities that had made me a burden at Thanksgiving, persistent focus on investment analysis outside traditional pathways, unwillingness to pursue conventional career advancement, had become the foundation for professional success that even my family's limited perspective could recognize. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. Opening it revealed a message from Lawrence at Vanguard, confirming final details for my onboarding and adding an unexpected update. "Our team has been reviewing your analysis of the specialized materials sector, particularly companies developing next-generation semiconductor substrates. Based on your insights, we've initiated positions in 2 of the firms you identified. Early results are promising. I'm increasingly convinced your analytical approach will bring significant value to our investment strategy." The validation wasn't just theoretical anymore. A prestigious firm was allocating actual capital based on my analysis, finding value where others had missed it. The transformative journey from family burden to recognized investment analyst had reached a new milestone. I returned to my laptop, continuing work on the investment guide that would capture my analytical framework for others. The document wasn't just a legacy for the coffee shop group anymore. It was becoming a manifesto for a broader approach to identifying overlooked value in markets and in people that might reach far beyond my individual journey. The burden had not just transformed, it had become a breakthrough with ripples, extending in directions I was only beginning to perceive. The French bistro my mother loved occupied a converted Victorian house on the outskirts of Hartford, its interior divided into intimate dining spaces with abundant natural light. I arrived, 15 minutes early, securing a quiet corner table with a view of the garden where early spring flowers were beginning to emerge from winter dormancy. "Ms. Palmer," the maitre d' greeted me with unexpected recognition. "Wonderful to see you again. Your guest hasn't arrived yet." I thanked him, settling into my seat and ordering sparkling water while I waited. My phone buzzed with a notification. From the Financial Insight Network app, my latest segment had gone live that morning, discussing emerging opportunities in biotechnology companies developing targeted cancer therapeutics. The comments section was already filling with thoughtful engagement, viewers asking insightful questions about my evaluation metrics for early-stage biotech firms. Outside the window, I spotted my mother's silver Lexus pulling into the parking lot. She emerged wearing a navy blue dress and pearl earrings, her standard attire for nice occasions, and smoothed her perfectly styled hair before walking toward the entrance. Her posture was impeccable as always, the physical embodiment of the control she attempted to maintain over all aspects of family presentation. I stood as she approached the table, accepting her brief embrace and the air kisses that substituted for genuine physical affection in our family's emotional economy. "You look well," she said, studying me with an evaluating gaze that had assessed my appearance since childhood. "Boston must agree with you." "I haven't moved yet," I reminded her gently. That happens next week, but I am feeling good. The waiter arrived with menus, and we navigated the small talk of ordering. My mother's detailed questions about preparation methods, my simpler selection of the spring vegetable risotto. When he departed, an uncomfortable silence expanded between us, filled with unspoken tensions stemming from Thanksgiving's confrontation and my subsequent absence from family gatherings. "Did you receive my gift?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Yes. It arrived Monday. The restored photo was—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Meaningful." I don't think I'd seen that particular wedding image in many years. "I found it when helping Dad organize the garage last summer," I explained. "It captured something special between you two." My mother nodded, her expression softening momentarily. "We were very young. Your father had just been accepted to law school, and everything seemed possible." Her gaze sharpened again. "Speaking of possibilities, he mentioned you've accepted some position in Boston?" The phrasing was deliberately vague, some position, minimizing what she couldn't yet categorize within her understanding of successful career paths. "Yes, I've accepted an analyst role at Vanguard Capital," I confirmed. "I'll be covering emerging technology sectors, particularly specialized semiconductors, biotech innovations, and advanced materials applications." I kept my tone casual but precise, neither apologizing for nor overstating my achievement. My mother tilted her head slightly, processing terminology outside her familiar lexicon. "That sounds technical," she offered. "Is this related to those investment interests you've mentioned over the years?" The question revealed volumes about our family dynamics. My investment interests had been a consistent focus for nearly a decade, the subject of my economics degree, countless hours of research, and the foundation of my growing portfolio. Yet in my mother's framing, they remained casual interests rather than serious professional development. "It's directly related," I confirmed. Vanguard was impressed by my analytical approach to identifying undervalued companies in transformative technology sectors. They've already allocated capital based on several of my recommendations. Our appetizers arrived, my mother's French onion soup and my simple salad, creating a brief reprieve from conversation. When the waiter departed, my mother stirred her soup thoughtfully before speaking. "Your father has been watching those investment segments you mentioned, the ones you recorded for that financial channel. He hasn't said much about them directly, to me, but I noticed he's set the DVR to record them." The revelation was surprising. My father, recording my financial insight network segments, the man who had dismissed my investment approach for years, was now quietly consuming my market analysis? "That's unexpected," I admitted. "He's always been proud of you children," my mother said, her tone suggesting this explained everything. "He just expresses it differently with each of you." I resisted the urge to challenge this revisionist history, to point out that differently meant lavish praise for my siblings' conventional accomplishments versus consistent dismissal of my unconventional path. Instead, I focused on the subtle shift her statement represented. My father was now including my work within the category of accomplishments he might potentially acknowledge. "Vanessa mentioned you're moving to her neighborhood in Boston," my mother continued, changing the subject. "Back Bay is expensive. This new position must pay well." The question beneath the observation was clear. How could her struggling daughter suddenly afford one of Boston's most prestigious addresses? "The compensation is significantly above industry average for comparable roles," I confirmed without specifics. "And yes, I've leased an apartment about 10 minutes from Vanessa and James, though in a different direction from their place." Our main courses arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. When the waiter departed, my mother took a deliberate bite of her coq au vin before looking up with studied casualness. "Your father and I have been thinking," she began, her tone shifting to the one she used when presenting family decisions as foregone conclusions. Since you'll be moving to Boston where Vanessa is already established, perhaps you two could coordinate on wedding preparations. She's feeling overwhelmed with her caseload at the firm, and having family help locally would ease her stress considerably. And there it was, the real agenda behind this reconciliatory lunch. Now that I was recategorized from family disappointment to potentially useful resource, I was being recruited to support my sister's wedding planning. I'll be establishing myself in a demanding new role, I replied carefully. My availability will be limited, especially in the first few months. Family supports family, Diane, my mother reminded me, invoking the principle that had been weaponized throughout my childhood to ensure compliance with unequal expectations. Vanessa would do the same for you. Would she? I wondered silently. My sister had never been asked to sacrifice her professional advancement for my benefit. The asymmetry had been baked into our family system from the beginning, my needs perpetually subordinate to my siblings' priorities. I'm happy to help Vanessa with specific tasks that work with my schedule, I offered as a compromise. But I won't be able to take on open-ended wedding responsibilities that might conflict with my professional obligations. My mother's lips tightened slightly, but she nodded. I suppose that's reasonable. Your new position must be quite demanding. The subtle emphasis on new and must be carried her skepticism about the role's legitimacy, despite its compensation level and connection to my long-standing expertise. Some perceptions were slow to change, regardless of mounting evidence. It involves considerable responsibility, I acknowledged. Vanguard is allocating significant capital based on my analyses and recommendations. That requires thorough research and careful judgment. We finished our meals with conversation drifting to safer topics. Local news, mutual acquaintances, the unexpected warm spell following a harsh winter. As the waiter cleared our plates, my mother circled back to the evening's plans. So, you'll join us for dinner tonight? Everyone will be there, and it would mean a lot to have the family complete for once. The invitation that wasn't really an invitation carried familiar pressure. Family complete. The implication was clear. My absence created incompleteness, regardless of the reason. My participation was framed as obligation rather than choice. I need to finalize materials for my investment group, I said, maintaining boundaries I'd been establishing since Thanksgiving. We have our last in-person session tomorrow before transitioning online. My mother's disappointment was evident but controlled. This investment group, it's just a hobby gathering, correct? Surely it could wait a day to accommodate family needs. The dismissal was so habitual she likely didn't even register it anymore. My professional commitments remained hobby gatherings in her perception, regardless of their growing impact or the fact that Lawrence had specifically encouraged me to maintain these educational initiatives as part of my vanguard role. It's a structured educational program I've been developing for months, I corrected gently. The participants have planned their schedules around tomorrow's session, and I've committed to providing comprehensive materials. I take those commitments seriously. Something in my tone must have communicated newfound resolve, because my mother didn't press further. Instead, she signaled for the check, which I intercepted smoothly. This is my treat, I reminded her. Happy birthday. She thanked me with a slight nod, though I noticed her glancing at the total when the receipt arrived for my signature. Another small assessment, checking whether her daughter's claimed financial advancement was reflected in her tipping practices. Outside the restaurant, we paused by our respective cars. The anticipated hug felt awkward, neither of us quite sure how to navigate physical affection in our evolving relationship. I'll let your father know you had other commitments tonight, she said, her voice carrying resignation rather than accusation. Perhaps we can arrange something before you move to Boston. I'd like that, I replied honestly. Despite the tensions, a part of me still sought healthier connection with my family, not the dependent relationship of the past, but something more balanced. As I drove away, I reflected on the lunch's undercurrents. My mother was cautiously recalibrating her perception of me, influenced by external markers of success she recognized: a prestigious job title, significant compensation, a Boston address. Yet the deeper recognition, understanding the expertise I'd developed and its legitimate value, remained elusive. My accomplishments were being grafted onto their existing framework rather than prompting a fundamental reassessment of how they evaluated achievement. Back at my apartment, I returned to preparing materials for tomorrow's final coffee shop session. The comprehensive guide had evolved into a substantial document, over 60 pages covering analytical frameworks, evaluation metrics, and practical applications. I'd included case studies drawn from my actual investment decisions, without naming specific companies, to illustrate how theoretical principles translated into practical judgment. My phone buzzed with a text message from my father. "Your mother enjoyed lunch. Sorry you can't make dinner tonight. Perhaps before you leave for Boston." The message was brief but noteworthy. Perhaps the first time he had acknowledged my absence. From a family gathering without criticism or guilt-inducing language, a small shift, but significant in our family's emotional ecosystem. Later that evening, as I finalized preparations for tomorrow's session, my phone lit up with a LinkedIn notification. Eleanor Wright from Financial Pathways, who had written the original article about my investment approach, had endorsed my profile and sent a connection request. Curious, I navigated to my rarely updated profile and discovered several recent endorsements from financial professionals who had encountered my work through either Financial Pathways or Financial Insight Network. More surprising was a message waiting in my inbox from a senior editor at Bloomberg Financial, inquiring about my interest in contributing periodic analysis pieces on emerging technology investments. The opportunity would complement my vanguard role while expanding my platform for sharing insights. Exactly the kind of development I'd hoped for when beginning my more public-facing activities. I drafted a careful response expressing interest, while noting my imminent transition to Vanguard Capital and the need to ensure any external content aligned with my new employer's policies. The exchange represented another step in the ongoing expansion of my professional reach, a trajectory that had accelerated dramatically since walking out of my parents' dining room on Thanksgiving. Saturday morning arrived with perfect spring weather, sunshine warming the last patches of stubborn snow into submission. I arrived at the coffee shop early, arranging tables to accommodate our largest group yet. Nearly 40 people eventually gathered, including all the regulars and several newcomers who had learned about the session through word of mouth. "I can't believe this is our last in-person meeting," Michelle said, helping me distribute printed materials. "It feels like we're graduating from something important." Her observation captured something essential about what had developed in this space. Not just information transfer, but a community of practice where people supported each other's financial education journey. What had begun as casual conversations had evolved into a structured learning environment that genuinely improved lives. "The online platform will allow us to continue growing together," I reminded her, "and expand to include others who couldn't attend in person." The session itself exceeded my expectations. Participants asked insightful questions, shared their own implementations of concepts we'd discussed, and expressed genuine appreciation for the knowledge they'd gained. Several people described specific financial decisions they'd made using our analytical frameworks, with outcomes that had meaningfully improved their circumstances. Before these sessions, I was investing based on random recommendations from financial influencers, confessed Ray, a high school teacher who had attended regularly since January. Now, I have a systematic approach for evaluating opportunities, based on fundamentals rather than hype. My portfolio isn't huge, but it's growing thoughtfully rather than chaotically. Others shared similar stories: debt reduced, emergency funds established, retirement investments optimized. The cumulative impact was humbling. What I'd originally shared to help one colleague understand investment basics had expanded into something that influenced dozens of financial trajectories. As the session concluded, Terrence presented me with a leather-bound journal from the group, its cover embossed with overlooked value and filled with personal notes from regular attendees describing how the sessions had impacted their financial lives. "You've given us tools to build financial independence," he said, emotion evident in his voice. "Not quick schemes or market gambling strategies, but sustainable approaches based on real analysis and patience. That's a gift that will compound over lifetimes." I accepted the journal, genuinely moved by the tangible representation of impact I hadn't fully registered until that moment. The path I'd chosen, developing investment expertise outside traditional channels, trusting my analytical approach, despite family skepticism, hadn't just transformed my own circumstances. It had created ripples that extended far beyond my individual journey. The group lingered after the formal session ended, exchanging contact information and discussing how they would utilize the online platform we were establishing. Several people asked about visiting me in Boston or attending in-person workshops if I offered them in the future. The connections formed around shared financial learning were genuine and valued. By the time I returned to my apartment that afternoon, I felt a profound sense of completion, not just of the coffee shop sessions, but of a chapter in my developmental journey. The transition to Boston and Vanguard Capital represented not merely geographic relocation, but evolution into a new professional identity, one built on demonstrated expertise rather than defensive justification. My phone buzzed with a notification from our family group chat. My brother Marcus had posted photos from last night's dinner, carefully framed to showcase familial harmony. My parents smiling at the head of the table. Vanessa and James engaged in animated conversation, Marcus's children looking unusually cooperative in their formal attire. Family dinner complete with good news all around, he had captioned the images. Dad received partnership emeritus status. Vanessa landed the Westridge account, and the twins made honor roll. Palmer excellence continues. The framing was familiar. Celebration of achievements that fit neatly into my family's established metrics of success. Law firm partnerships, prestigious clients, academic recognition, all external validations from institutions they respected. My absence from both the dinner and the accomplishment roster was conspicuous yet unremarked upon, maintaining the family narrative without acknowledging its incomplete nature. As I scrolled through responses, congratulatory messages from extended family, appreciative acknowledgments from my parents, I felt oddly detached from the familiar dynamics. The validation I'd once craved from this system no longer held the same power over my emotional state. I had built alternative sources of recognition that felt more aligned with my authentic values and contributions. I typed a simple response: "Congratulations to everyone on their accomplishments. Looking forward to sharing news about my Vanguard Capital role and Financial Insight Network segments when I visit before moving to Boston." The message was direct, but not confrontational, acknowledging their achievements while gently inserting my own into the family consciousness. It represented a middle path between the complete withdrawal that had followed Thanksgiving and the automatic accommodation that had characterized my previous family interactions. Moments later, my phone rang. My brother Marcus, calling directly, rather than responding in the group chat. "Hey," he began awkwardly. "Got your message in the family chat. Dad mentioned you've landed some finance job in Boston?" The phrasing echoed my parents' deliberate vagueness. Some finance job, minimizing what they didn't fully understand or accept. "I've accepted an analyst position with Vanguard Capital," I confirmed, "covering emerging technology sectors." "That's different from the credit union," he offered tentatively. "How did that come about? I thought you didn't have the finance credentials for that kind of role." The question was potentially offensive, but seemed genuinely curious rather than dismissive. Unlike my parents, Marcus had never actively criticized my path. He had simply accepted the family's implicit hierarchy that placed his architectural career and Vanessa's legal accomplishments above my customer service position. I've been developing expertise in value investing for years, I explained, particularly in identifying undervalued opportunities in transformative technology sectors. My analytical approach caught attention through some published work in media, appearances which led to conversations with Vanguard's leadership. Published work? Media appearances? Marcus sounded genuinely confused. What have you been publishing? The disconnect was revealing. How thoroughly my professional development had existed outside my family's awareness, despite spanning years of consistent focus and increasingly public recognition. I've been featured in Financial Pathways, Contribute, regular segments to Financial Insight Network, and was recently referenced in the Wall Street Journal's personal finance section, I summarized. My investment performance over the past few years has significantly outpaced market averages, which has generated interest from firms seeking analytical approaches outside traditional frameworks. Silence expanded on the line as Marcus processed information that clearly contradicted his understanding of his sister's professional standing. That's impressive, he finally managed. I had no idea you were doing all that alongside the credit union job. It's been my primary focus for years, I clarified. The credit union position provided stability while I developed my investment approach and portfolio. And now it's become your actual career, he noted, his tone suggesting he was still recalibrating his perception of me. In Boston, no less. The timing worked well, I acknowledged. Vanguard's Emerging Technologies division is based there, and the role aligns perfectly with my expertise. Another pause, then. Listen, Vanessa mentioned she's hoping you'll help with wedding stuff once you're settled. I know you two haven't always been close, but it might be a good opportunity to reconnect. The suggestion circled back to familiar family patterns, my availability presumed for supporting others' priorities, regardless of my own professional demands. But Marcus's tone lacked the expectation of automatic compliance that typically accompanied such requests. I've let Vanessa know I can help with specific tasks that work with my schedule, I replied. My first few months at Vanguard will be intensive as I establish myself in the role. That makes sense, Marcus said, surprising me with his ready acceptance. New jobs are demanding, especially at that level. I'll help manage expectations. On this end. The offer represented a small but significant shift in our sibling dynamics, recognition of my professional commitments as legitimate priorities rather than secondary concerns that should automatically yield to family demands. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. Hey, before you go, any chance you could look at my retirement portfolio sometime? I've been letting my firm's recommended advisor handle it, but from what you're saying, maybe I should be taking a more active approach. The request represented another shift, acknowledgement of expertise I possessed that my brother, the traditionally successful sibling, did not. It opened a potential new dimension in our relationship, one based on mutual recognition of different strengths rather than hierarchical comparison. I'd be happy to review it with you, I offered. Maybe when I visit before the move? We agreed. On timing, ending the call with more genuine warmth than had characterized our interactions in years. The conversation left me thoughtful about how family relationships might evolve as my professional identity continued to transform and gain external validation they recognized. That evening, as I packed materials for my impending move to Boston, I came across the leather-bound journal from the coffee shop group. Opening it, I read through the personal notes, stories of financial anxiety transformed into confidence, of practical knowledge applied to improve actual lives, of gratitude for guidance that made complex concepts accessible. One entry particularly caught my attention, written in Michelle's neat handwriting. Before your investment sessions, I saw myself as someone who was bad with money. A fixed identity I'd accepted after my divorce left me drowning in debt. Through your teaching, I've not only learned practical investment principles, but gained confidence in my ability to make sound financial decisions. The most valuable lesson wasn't about market analysis, but about recognizing untapped potential in companies and in ourselves. You saw value where others, including me, saw only limitations. That perspective changes everything. Her words captured something essential about the journey that had unfolded since Thanksgiving. Not just external success, measured in portfolio performance or professional advancement, but a fundamental shift in recognizing value where others saw limitation. The burden label my father had attached to me had reflected not objective reality, but a failure of perspective. Inability to recognize potential that didn't conform to familiar metrics. As I prepared for the next chapter in Boston, I understood that my greatest breakthrough wasn't landing the vanguard position or creating successful media content, but developing the confidence to trust my own analytical judgment about markets and about myself, even when those closest to me couldn't yet see what I recognized clearly. The burden was transforming not just into professional success, but into a ripple effect of empowerment that extended far beyond my individual journey. 6 months after moving to Boston, I stood at the window of my office at Vanguard Capital, watching autumn leaves swirl across the courtyard 20 floors below. The view encompassed the Charles River and Cambridge beyond, a panorama that still caught me by surprise each morning. So different from the modest parking lot outlook at the credit union where I'd spent years in customer service. My desk displayed subtle evidence of the transition: industry awards for 2 investment strategies I'd developed, framed articles from financial publications featuring my analysis, and most meaningfully, a small collection of notes from members of my former coffee shop investment group describing significant financial milestones they'd achieved using principles we'd explored together. A gentle knock interrupted my reflection. Lawrence appeared in the doorway, his characteristic energy barely contained even in professional settings. "Ready for the quarterly presentation?" he asked, though his tone suggested confidence rather than actual inquiry. "The investment committee is particularly interested in your semiconductor substrate thesis. The preliminary returns are compelling." I nodded, gathering my materials. In the 6 months since joining Vanguard, I'd introduced several investment theses that had substantially outperformed market expectations. My approach to identifying overlooked value in transformative technology sectors had translated effectively from personal portfolio management to institutional application, validating Lawrence's decision to recruit someone without traditional credentials. "The extended applications beyond initial target markets are particularly noteworthy," I commented as we walked toward the conference room. "The materials engineering breakthrough that makes these substrates viable for quantum computing also opens unexpected opportunities in medical imaging and renewable energy storage." Lawrence smiled appreciatively. "That cross-sectoral impact analysis is exactly why you're transforming our approach to emerging technologies. Most analysts stay within narrowly defined verticals. Your horizontal perspective identifies connection, points others miss entirely." The quarterly investment committee meeting unfolded with a rhythm I'd grown comfortable navigating, presenting analysis, fielding questions, defending positions with evidence rather than jargon. My initial nervousness about operating in these institutional settings had faded as repeated success built credibility that transcended my unconventional background. The semiconductor substrate positions have returned 28% against benchmark over the past quarter, noted Gerald Matthews, the typically reserved committee chair. Diane's thesis regarding supply chain reconfiguration appears to be playing out exactly as projected. The biotech applications portfolio shows similar outperformance, added Evelyn Cho, head of healthcare investments. Particularly the targeted therapeutics we added based on Diane's analytical framework. The validation was professionally satisfying but no longer surprising. My analytical approach consistently identified overlooked value that conventional metrics missed. the fundamental insight that had driven my personal investing success now scaled to institutional capital allocation. As the meeting concluded, Lawrence lingered behind as others filed out. "The Wall Street Journal piece comes out tomorrow," he reminded me. "Their reporter was particularly interested in your perspective on overlooked opportunities in climate adaptation technologies." The upcoming feature represented another expansion of my professional platform, a full-profile piece exploring my analytical approach and investment philosophy. The reporter had spent several hours interviewing me about my unconventional pathway into institutional investing and the principles that guided my identification of overlooked value opportunities. I reviewed the fact-check materials they sent over, I confirmed. "Everything looks accurate, though their framing of my background is more dramatic than I would have constructed." Lawrence chuckled. "Dramatic but factual makes for compelling financial journalism. Your journey from credit union customer service to outperforming hedge fund managers is objectively remarkable. Readers find that narrative encouraging, proof that methodical expertise can triumph over pedigree." Back in my office, I found a notification from Eleanor at Financial Pathways, the editor whose original article had helped launch my public-facing career. She'd sent an advance copy of a follow-up piece scheduled for publication next week. From Blog to Bloomberg, How Diane Palmer's Investment Approach Gained Institutional Adoption. The article tracked the evolution of my analytical framework, from personal blog to institutional implementation, including data on returns generated by my recommended positions. Eleanor had interviewed several Vanguard colleagues as well as participants from my coffee shop investment group, creating a multi-dimensional portrait of impact across different contexts. One passage particularly caught my attention. "Palmer's most significant contribution may not be specific investment returns, impressive though they are, but her demonstration that valuable financial insight can develop outside traditional pathways. Her background in economics provided foundational knowledge, but her methodology emerged through independent study and practical application, rather than conventional institutional training. This suggests financial institutions might benefit from expanding their talent identification beyond traditional credentials to include demonstrated analytical capability regardless of origin." The observation aligned with conversations I'd been having with Lawrence about potentially developing an analyst training program at Vanguard that would identify promising talent from unconventional backgrounds, people with demonstrated analytical capability who might not have followed traditional finance career paths. My phone chimed with a notification from my calendar. "Family dinner, 7 p.m. The reminder triggered a complex mix of emotions. Since moving to Boston, my relationship with family members had evolved in unexpected ways, particularly as my professional profile continued rising in financial circles. Vanessa had been the first to actively recalibrate our relationship. Initially approaching me for obligatory wedding planning assistance, she had gradually shifted to seeking genuine financial guidance after James's law firm announced structural changes that created career uncertainty. Our conversations had evolved, from superficial small talk to substantive discussions about investment principles and financial planning, territory where she now acknowledged my expertise without reservation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.